Zara Reyes had a gift for ending up in the worst possible version of every situation. She was late to her own eviction notice. That was the kind of person she was. The envelope had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 4 days, wedged under a coffee mug she kept forgetting to wash, and she had walked past it 14 times before she finally picked it up on a Thursday morning with wet hair and toast in her mouth. She read it twice. Then, she sat down on the floor. Not a chair. The floor. Because sometimes the floor was the only honest place to be. 30 days. Her landlord, a soft, apologetic man named Gerald who always smelled like cough drops, had sold the building. New ownership. New management. New price. The rent would triple starting the 1st of next month, which was, Zara calculated while staring at a crack in the tile, 3 weeks and 4 days away. Fantastic, she said to no one. Absolutely fantastic. She was 24 years old. She had a journalism degree, a half-finished novel on her laptop that she hated, and a freelance income that covered roughly 70% of her actual needs in a good month. She had no savings. She had a cat named Brutus who ate better than she did and felt no guilt about it. She had a best friend named Priya who lived 20 minutes away and would absolutely let her sleep on her couch, which meant Zara would absolutely never ask. Pride was a poverty tax. She knew that. She paid it anyway. She peeled herself off the floor, dropped the eviction notice in the recycling bin because she was not emotionally equipped to look at it again that day, and opened her laptop. There was an email. Subject: freelance writer position, Vane editorial group. Competitive rate. Immediate start. She stared at it. The email had arrived at 2:17 in the morning, which was a strange hour for HR correspondence. The sender was listed only as L. Vane. No department. No title. No pleasantries in the body, just an address, a time, and the words, "We understand you were looking." Zara did not remember applying to anything called Vane Editorial Group. She did not remember applying to most things she applied to because she mass applied with the desperate, scattershot energy of someone throwing handfuls of seeds at concrete and hoping something took root. It was possible. It was also possible this was a scam. She Googled it. Vane Editorial Group had an address on the north side of the city, in a building that came up in no real estate listings, belonged to no business registry she could find, and had exactly one photograph on the internet, grainy, probably taken from across the street, showing a tall stone building with dark windows and no signage. The Reddit thread attached to the photograph was titled, "Does anyone know what this place is?" It had 43 replies, none of which answered the question. Priya, when Zara called her, said, "That sounds like a murder building." All buildings look like murder buildings at the right angle. Zara. I need a job, Priya. I need a job in the next 3 weeks or I'm sleeping in my car, which doesn't have AC, which means I'm sleeping on your couch, which means you'll be passive-aggressive about it for 6 months, which means we'll stop being friends, which means I'll have nothing. A pause. Then, what time is the interview? The building did not look like a murder building in person. It looked like something older than murder. Like something murder would feel small inside. The stone was the dark gray of storm clouds that had given up. The windows on the upper floors reflected nothing, no sky, no street, no Zara standing in front of the entrance with her portfolio folder pressed to her chest like a shield. The door was already open when she arrived. Not ajar. Not unlocked. Open. Waiting. She went in because she had 30 days and no plan B. The interior was not what she expected. No gothic excess. No dramatic chandeliers or velvet drapes. It was spare, actually, high ceilings, dark wood floors, walls lined with bookshelves that ran floor to ceiling and made the rooms feel like the inside of a thought. There was a front desk, unstaffed. A hallway that led to a staircase. Somewhere deep in the building, a clock ticked with the slow patience of something that had nowhere to be. You are earlier than I expected. The voice came from the top of the stairs. Zara looked up. She had written about attractive people before. In fiction, in profiles, in the kind of lazy lifestyle pieces she took to pay her phone bill. She had all the standard language for it: sharp jaw, striking eyes, the usual artillery. She had never once meant any of it. She meant it now. Every stupid word of it. Lucian Vane stood at the top of that staircase the way certain things stand, with the absolute certainty that the space around them exists to frame them and not the other way around. He was tall. Dark coat. Dark everything. His face was the kind of face that made people do things they later had to explain to themselves in the bathroom mirror. He was looking at her with dark eyes that did not blink at the normal human rate, and the looking felt like an assessment, careful and thorough, like she was a text he was reading for the second time to find what he had missed the first. Zara's brain said, "Do not be an idiot about this." Her mouth said, "I brought my portfolio." She held up the folder. Immediately regretted it. Put it back down. Something in his expression shifted. Not a smile. The negative space where a smile would have been if he were the kind of person who smiled. He came down the stairs. He moved quietly for someone his size. Too quietly. The floorboards that had creaked under Zara's heels made no sound under his. She filed that information away in a folder she did not look at again for 2 weeks. "Zara Reyes," he said. Her name in his mouth had an odd quality, not warmth, not recognition, something that sat between the two and was neither. Sit. Not please sit. Not would you like to sit. Just sit, like the chair had already been informed of its purpose and was waiting on her. She sat. The interview was unlike any interview she had ever had. He did not look at her portfolio. He did not ask where she saw herself in 5 years, or what her greatest weakness was, or any of the other questions she had rehearsed on the bus. He asked her what she had lost. He asked what she still wanted. He asked, and this was the question that snagged in her chest like a pulled thread, whether she believed that some debts could not be settled in a single lifetime. Zara looked at him. "That's a strange interview question." "Yes," he said. He did not explain it. She answered honestly because she was tired and because the building felt like a place where lying would have visible consequences. She said she had lost her mother 3 years ago and had not finished grieving because she had not figured out yet how to do that while also paying rent. She said she still wanted to write something true. She said she did not know about debts, but she believed some griefs were longer than one person could hold. He was quiet for a long moment. "The position is research and editorial work," he said. "Long hours. The subjects are not always comfortable. The pay is," he named a figure that made Zara's portfolio folder drop out of her hands and hit the floor. She picked it up. Put it on the table. Left her hand on it to keep herself steady. "When do I start?" she said. She started Monday. She told Priya it was a regular job. "Content work," she said. "Editorial research." Priya asked why she was being vague and Zara said she wasn't being vague, she was being concise, and Priya said those were not the same thing and Zara changed the subject to Brutus, which always worked because Priya loved Brutus despite claiming otherwise. The work itself was strange. Not bad strange. Interesting strange. The Vane editorial group appeared to deal in historical research, obscure histories, unpublished records, lineages and bloodlines traced back centuries. Zara's first assignment was cross-referencing a set of handwritten letters from the 1700s against a family registry from the same period. The letters were in near-perfect condition for their age. The ink was dark. The handwriting was meticulous and small and moved across the page with the unhurried precision of someone who had all the time they needed. There were 6 other people on staff. They were polite. They answered questions with a specificity that somehow left her knowing less than before she asked. They worked at strange hours. She did not ask about that either. Lucian was present every day and absent from every room in a way that made her notice him constantly without being able to explain why. He would be at his desk when she arrived, reviewing documents she was never invited to look at. He would look up when she entered, hold the look for 2 seconds, precisely 2 seconds, she started counting, and then return to his work. He was not warm. He was not unkind. He was thorough. On her 5th day, she accidentally knocked a full mug of coffee across the conference table and, directly onto a set of documents that were, she would learn 3 seconds later, over 200 years old. Time stopped. Zara stood there with the empty mug in her hand watching the coffee spread across the paper and thought, this is it. This is how I die professionally, don't move. Lucian's voice came from the doorway. He was across the room in the time it took her to register that he had moved 3 steps, maybe 4, faster than the distance required, and he had the documents lifted and tilted and separated before the damage could worsen. His hands were very steady. Very pale. Very cold-looking in the way that skin can look cold before you've touched it. She hadn't touched them. She was thinking about it. Which was idiotic. "I'm so sorry," she said. Those were important, I'll pay for it." "You can't pay for these," he said, still focused on the documents. "I know. I meant gesturally." Something happened in his face. Something small and involuntary. He almost smiled. He didn't. But the moment was there and then it was gone and he was setting the documents aside to dry and leaving the room as quietly as he had entered it, and Zara stood alone in the conference room with a coffee mug and the distinct feeling that she had just seen something she wasn't supposed to see. She cleaned up the spill. Took the mug to the kitchen. Stood at the sink for a moment. Who apologizes with the word gesturally *, she thought. Nobody. Nobody does that, she'd done it anyway. In front of him. And he'd almost smiled. She went back to work. What Zara did not know, and would not know for weeks, Lucian Vane had been alive for 643 years. He had built and lost 3 kingdoms in that time. He had watched cities rise and burn and rise again in new shapes with new names that people said with the same conviction their great-grandparents had used for the old ones. He had learned 15 languages, forgotten 4, and kept the rest like stones in a coat pocket, heavy, useful, cold. He had been a king once, in the way that mattered before the word meant ceremonies and waving. The kind of king who held territory with his body and his name and the specific quality of stillness that made other powerful things reconsider. He had also had a brother. His name was Daniel. He had been younger by 12 years, born human and turned at 19 at his own insistence, burning with the same conviction that ran in the Vane blood before the blood changed. He had been reckless and loyal and furious about injustice in the way only the very young can be, as if the world's failures are a personal insult, as if enough anger can fix them. He had trusted a family. The Reyes family. Old blood, old money, old promises. They had come to him with a treaty and left with information about Lucian's network, and 3 months later Daniel was gone. Ash and a cold room and nothing else. 3 months after that, the Reyes family had moved continents, changed names, scattered into history like coins thrown in different directions. Lucian had waited. He was good at waiting. 600 years of practice. When the last living thread of the Reyes bloodline surfaced, a girl in a northern city, half Portuguese by her father's side and half Colombian by her mother's, carrying the name through a grandmother's maiden name that she probably didn't even know the history of, he had not moved immediately. He had watched. He had prepared. He had built the infrastructure of revenge with the same meticulous care he brought to everything. The plan was simple. Get close. Dismantle her life in pieces. Take everything she had built the way everything he had built had been taken. Leave her with nothing. Simple. He had not planned for the coffee. He had not planned for her to say gesturally with complete sincerity and a slight wince, like she was already judging herself for it, and for that to be somehow the most human thing he had witnessed in a decade. He sat at his desk that evening after the building had emptied and he held one of the damaged documents in his hands and he thought about Daniel, which he did deliberately, like pressing a bruise to make sure it still hurt. It still hurt. He thought about Zara Reyes standing in the conference room with a mug and her mouth doing that complicated thing it did when she was embarrassed, twisting to the left, a small involuntary thing, honest in the way faces are honest when the person behind them has not yet learned to control them. She had not learned to control very much, he thought. She laughed too loudly. She talked to herself when she thought no one could hear. She ate lunch at her desk every day and always forgot something in the bag, a fork, a napkin, something, and improvised rather than going back for it. She had a habit of underlining things in her research documents and writing tiny notes in the margins in handwriting that was slightly illegible and completely unprofessional, and somehow this was the most useful editorial feedback anyone in the building had produced in months. He was not fond of her. He was observing her. There was a difference. He told himself this in the careful, deliberate way he told himself many things, with full conviction and no room for argument. He set the document down. Outside, the city moved in its usual currents, indifferent and loud, full of people carrying their histories in their bodies without knowing it. Somewhere in a small apartment that he owned and she rented, Zara Reyes was probably eating something inadequate and talking to her cat and not thinking about him at all. Good. That was correct. That was exactly how it should be. He opened his next file. 3 weeks in, she found the archive room. It was not hidden, exactly. It was simply at the end of a hallway she had not been directed toward, behind a door that was unlocked because no one had considered she would wander that far. Zara had a professional relationship with directions that could be generously described as creative. She found the archive the way she found most things, by not going where she was supposed to. The room was the size of a small library. The shelves went to the ceiling. The documents on them were older than anything she had handled in the conference room, organized by date in a system that went back further than made sense for a private editorial firm. There were records from the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s. And, in a folder near the middle shelf, organized by family name in alphabetical order, Reyes. She pulled the folder. It was thick. Decades of correspondence and records and notations in the same small, meticulous handwriting she had been reading on documents all month. She stood in the archive room in the hum of the climate control and read the first page. Then, the second. Then, she stopped. She stood there for a moment with the folder in her hands and the information sitting in her chest like something swallowed wrong. Her family name. Her grandmother's maiden name. Letters that matched the dates of things her mother had told her in half sentences, the move, the name change, things that happened before you were born, mi amor, things we don't need to carry forward. She had a very specific feeling then. Not fear. Something older than fear. The feeling of standing in a story that had been going on without you. She put the folder back exactly as she found it. She walked back to her desk. She sat down. She worked for the rest of the day with the focused, deliberate attention of someone who has decided not to think about something until they are ready to, which is a different thing from not thinking about it at all. When she left that evening, Lucian was standing in the lobby. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, 2 seconds, thorough, unreadable. She looked back. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She went out the door and into the city and did not run. Because she was not a person who ran, not anymore, not since she had learned that whatever you were running from had generally already arrived. She went home and sat on the floor with Brutus in her lap and thought. Outside, the city was loud and bright and completely indifferent. The clock on her wall ticked. She sat there for a long time. She came back the next morning. That was the first thing that surprised him. Lucian had calculated, with the precision of someone who had watched human behavior for 6 centuries, that she would come indifferently guarded, quiet, watching him from a new angle. He had seen the light on in the archive room the evening before. He knew what she had found. He had, in fact, left the corridor unlocked on purpose. Not to show her everything, only enough. The folder with the family records. The name. The thread. He had wanted her unsettled. She came in with coffee, 2 cups, one of which she set on the corner of his desk without breaking stride, without eye contact, without the small hesitation that would have told him something important. "I made too much," she said, already walking toward her office. "I always make too much. It's a flaw." He looked at the cup. He looked at the door she had disappeared through. He picked up the cup, because refusing it would require explaining the refusal, and he was not ready for that conversation. The coffee was good. strong, slightly bitter. She had not asked how he took it. She had simply made it the way she made it and handed it over with the casual confidence of someone who assumes their preferences are reasonable and trusts you to agree. He sat with that for longer than the coffee warranted. The archive door had been locked by that afternoon. Quietly, efficiently, as if it had always been locked. Zara noticed. She did not say anything. She filed it in the same careful, unmarked cabinet she was building in the back of her mind, the one that held all the things that didn't make sense, organized loosely by the category. Figure this out later. She was building quite a collection. The staff who never ate. The hours. The way cold seemed to settle in certain rooms when Lucian walked through them, not dramatically, not movie cold, not mist end, candles cold, just the quiet drop in temperature of a window left open in autumn. The documents in her research work that described things with a researcher's familiarity that no living person should have been able to provide. The handwriting in the oldest files, 16th century correspondence, that matched the handwriting in Lucian's daily notes exactly. Not similar. Matched. She was a journalist by training. She knew the difference between a coincidence and a pattern. She also knew the difference between pursuing a story and getting swallowed by one, and she was standing precisely on that line. She typed up her research notes for the day. She ate her lunch. She forgot her napkin and used a page torn from her notebook instead, which left ink on her fingers, and she didn't notice until 4 in the afternoon. She knocked on Lucian's office door at 5:15. "Come in," he said. He was at his desk with a book. Not a laptop, not a document. A book with a cracked spine and pages that had gone soft with use, and he did not look like someone who had been caught being human. He looked like what he was, completely at ease in his own existence. "I have a question," Zara said. "And I want you to know before I ask it that I'm not." She stopped. Tried again. "I'm not going to be dramatic about the answer. Whatever it is." He set the book down. "The folder in the archive," she said. "The one with my family name. How long have you been collecting those records?" A pause. The kind that was not hesitation but consideration. He already knew his answer, he was choosing whether to give it. "A long time," he said. "How long?" "Longer than you have a framework for," he said. "At present." Zara looked at him. She was doing the thing with her mouth twisting slightly to the left. He had learned what this meant. It meant she was processing something difficult and choosing not to show how difficult it was. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated, and the word in his mouth sounded unused. Like a chair in a room that never had guests. "I'll ask better questions when I know better questions to ask," she said. "That's not a threat. That's just, I don't like asking things I can't follow up on." She left. He sat there for a moment with the book in his hands and the chair still warm from when she had stood near it. She had not sat, she had stood near the chair the whole time, which was either wariness or impatience, he hadn't decided, and he thought about Daniel. Daniel would have liked her. The thought arrived without invitation and stayed without permission. He put it away. October in the city meant the leaves turned colors that made the whole place look like a controlled burn, and Zara, who had grown up somewhere flatter and less dramatic, had never entirely gotten used to it. She walked to work now. The apartment Lucian owned, which she had not yet put together with the building she worked in, was 12 minutes on foot, and every morning the walk was different and the same streets in new light, the trees performing their reliable annual death with considerable style. She had been doing research, on her own time, in ways she was careful about. There was not much to find about Lucian Vane. That itself was information. In the age when everyone had a trail, childhood photos, tagged memories, old email signatures, the absence of a trail was a shape. It told her, intentional. It told her, very old money or very deliberate erasure. It told her, this person has been managing their footprint for longer than digital records have existed. She found one photograph. It was in a private collection database she accessed through a journalism contact, a scanned daguerreotype from the mid-1800s, identified by the archive as unknown, possibly European circa 1851. It had been found with a collection of documents that included the name Vane in a property record. The man in the photograph had the same face. Not similar. The same. She sat with her laptop in the kitchen at 11 at night and looked at the photograph for a long time. Brutus knocked a pen off the counter. "Thank you," she said. "Very helpful." She closed the laptop. She was not frightened. That surprised her, and then, it didn't. Fear required surprise, and she was past surprised. She was in the territory that comes after, the territory that asked, fine. And, now what came next, as it happened, was a Thursday evening and a man named Stefan. Stefan was from somewhere in Lucian's network. Zara had seen him twice before, brief visits, quiet conversations that stopped when she came near. He was tall, blond, composed in the way of someone who has been trained out of spontaneity. He looked at her the way certain people looked at things, not with interest, but with inventory. She didn't like him. She had learned to trust that. The evening started normally. She was working late on a research document that was due Friday and had ordered food to the building rather than lose the hour going home for dinner. Stefan arrived at 7. He and Lucian went into the back office. She ate her food. She worked. At 8:30, she needed a document from the filing cabinet in the second hallway. She went to get it. She passed the back office. The door was not fully closed. She heard her name. She stopped. Not because she was eavesdropping, she was not standing still long enough to be eavesdropping, but because hearing your name in a room you are not in creates a biological response that overrides decision-making, and she was human enough to feel it. Stefan's voice, even through the door, she found the archive folder. She knows more than you intended. The timeline needs to move forward. A silence. Then, Lucian's voice, which she recognized the way she was beginning to recognize very few things, by its exact weight. "No. The longer you wait," I said. "No." Still quiet. Quieter than before, which was somehow louder. "Lucian. She is a Reyes. Daniel is. I am aware of what Daniel is." 2 seconds. 3. "Leave it." Zara went back to her desk. She sat down. She finished the document. She sent it. She packed her bag. She said good night to the empty reception area and walked home in the cold, and somewhere around the 7th block she stopped under a street lamp and stood there with her breath making small clouds and the leaves doing their beautiful dying around her feet. A Reyes. Daniel. A timeline. She thought about the folder. The records going back centuries. The handwriting that matched. She thought about the way Lucian had said no, not in the way of someone who was being merciful. In the way of someone who was arguing with themselves and losing. She thought, whatever this is, it started before me. She thought, whatever this is, it is not finished. She walked the rest of the way home. He found the excuse to visit her apartment the following week. A maintenance issue, the building was old, one of his properties, and the heating unit in her apartment required inspection. He sent a notice. He came with a technician. He stood in her doorway while the technician did the actual work and looked at the space she occupied. It was small. Books in every corner and, on every surface, not decoratively arranged but actually read, pages marked and spines cracked. A wall of notes near her desk that had become a secondary wall of notes that had expanded to include the window frame. Post-its and printed photographs and handwritten fragments connected with string and colors that meant something only to her. His photograph was not on the wall. He checked. Twice. There was a photograph of a woman in her 50s on the small table near the window, dark hair, Zara's same stubborn mouth. Her mother, he knew, died 3 years ago. The photograph had been placed in the light deliberately. Brutus arrived and sat on his foot. Cats, in his experience, either ran from him or went completely the other direction. Brutus was occupying his foot with the comfortable certainty of a creature that had never been afraid of anything and did not intend to start. "He likes you," Zara said from across the room. She was watching him look at her books. "He doesn't like most people. He has poor judgment," Lucian said. He really doesn't, actually. She said it lightly. She was not looking at him. He was not looking at her. They were both looking at other things in the same room, which is not a neutral activity. The technician finished. Lucian left. He walked back to the building in the cold and went to his desk and sat there and did not open any of the documents waiting for him. He thought about the wall of notes. The books. The photograph in the light. He thought about a girl in the 1700s who had lived in a house with Reyes on the deed and had hosted his brother for 3 months and had looked at Daniel with something that turned out to be calculation dressed as warmth. He thought about Zara saying gesturally with a wince. He thought, these are not the same person. He had known this since the 3rd day. He had been refusing to think it since the 2nd week. The revenge he had built, 600 years of waiting distilled into a precise, careful dismantling of one life, had been designed for a category of person. A bloodline. A name. The name was correct. The person was not what he had prepared for. He opened the file on his desk. He stared at it. He was not going to abandon this. He had waited 6 centuries. He had watched Daniel's city burn and his own kingdoms collapse and every alliance he had ever trusted prove breakable. He had carried this the way certain griefs are carried, not as weight but as structure, as the thing that holds the shape of what you are. He would not abandon it for a girl who brought him coffee and forgot her napkin. He would not. The thing that changed it was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday, 2 weeks later. Zara was walking home late. She often walked home late now. The rot had become its own kind of thinking, the cold and the leaves and the lit windows of other people's evenings a reliable backdrop for whatever she needed to work through. She was working through several things. The usual pile. 3 men followed her from the corner of the 6th block. She knew before she was certain, the way women learn to know before they are certain, the footstep rhythm that matches yours when you speed up, the conversation that pauses when yours does. She kept walking. She did not run. She turned at a street she did not need to turn at. They turned too. She was about to make a different calculation, her phone in her bag, the coffee shop 2 blocks up, whether the light was enough, when they stopped. She did not stop. She kept walking. But she heard it, a shift behind her, a sound she did not turn to identify, and then the footsteps were gone. She made it to the next block. She stopped and breathed. She looked behind her. The street was empty. Except for Lucian, standing at the corner she had turned from, watching her go. He did not move. He did not call out. He stood there in the dark in his long dark coat with his hands at his sides and the look on his face that she could not read from this distance, and he waited until she had started walking again before he turned away. She walked the rest of the way home. She sat on her kitchen floor. She sat there for a long time. He had been following her. She understood that now, not that evening specifically, but as a pattern. He had been in places she turned corners and found empty. The office building across from her coffee shop. The street where she picked up groceries. All of it wrapped in the same plausible deniability, the same careful distance. He had been following her. And, just now, those men, she did not know what had happened and she did not look up what had happened and she did not want to know what had happened. But, they were gone. And, he was there. She sat on the floor and Brutus came and sat against her and the clock ticked and the city was loud outside the window. She had 2 facts. They pointed in opposite directions and they were both true. He had been collecting records on her family for some purpose she did not fully understand. He had just protected her from something in a street at 10 o'clock at night. She looked at the photograph of her mother on the table. Her mother had left a family history she never explained. Things we don't need to carry forward, mi amor, as if grief could be packed up and left like furniture. As if you got to choose which parts of the past followed you. She thought about Lucian saying no through a half-open door. The particular weight of that single syllable, the way it landed like something that cost him. She did not know what any of this was. She knew that she was going to find out. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. In the morning she knocked on his office door again. He was at his desk. The same book he read slowly, she had noticed, with the patience of someone who knew there was no hurry. "Tell me about Daniel," she said. His face did not change. Not even the small involuntary shift she had learned to watch for. Complete stillness, the kind that is not calm but is something older than calm, something that has been practiced until it looks like the real thing. "Sit down," he said. She sat. Outside the window, October was ending. The trees were almost bare. He closed the book. He looked at her for the first time in weeks without the careful management of where to look and, for how long, looked at her directly, with something in his expression that she had no word for and suspected he had stopped looking for a word for himself. He said, "How much do you know?" "Enough to ask better questions," she said. "Like you told me I would." He was quiet. Then, slowly, like someone moving something heavy that has sat in one place for too long, he began to talk. He told her in segments. Not all at once, she understood that. 600 years of silence did not open itself in one afternoon. It came in pieces, like archived documents pulled from a shelf one at a time, each one placed on the table and allowed to sit before the next appeared. She did not rush him. She was a journalist. She knew how to hold a silence. He told her about Daniel first. That was where it lived, all of it, underneath everything. Daniel was the floor. 19 years old when he was turned. 31 in appearance when he was killed, which meant he had lived 12 years as the person he became and Lucian had lived 600 years as the person Daniel's loss made him. He said this without emotion, with the flatness of someone describing geography. Here is the mountain, here is where it stands, here is what the elevation does to the air around it. She listened. She did not say "I'm sorry" until he was finished, and, when she did say it, she did not perform it. It was small, and direct, and it landed the way things do when they are said by someone who has also lost people and knows the specific inadequacy of the phrase and says it anyway because the alternative is silence. He looked at her. She looked back. "The family," she said. "The Reyes family," he said. "A branch of it. Your grandmother's side. They had a different name by then, changed it twice after the 1700s. It took me a long time to trace." "And, when you found me?" "Yes." She was quiet. She looked at her hands, a habit, he had noticed. She looked at her hands when she was building something careful in her head. "What was the plan?" she said. He told her. He told her with the same flatness, the same geography voice. "The job, the building, the salary, your rent was my money, your income was my design. I had built the conditions of your stability so I could dismantle them." He watched her face as he said it. He did not look away. Her face did not do the mouth twist. It did something else, went very still and very closed, the shutters she kept behind her regular expression and almost never used. "Right," she said. One word. Quiet as a stone dropped in water. "I want to be clear," he said. "The plan is no longer, I heard you say no through a door," she said. "I know it changed." She looked up from her hands. "I want to know why it changed." He said nothing. "Because if it changed because you felt sorry for me," she said, "that is somehow worse. I can work with a lot of things but I cannot." She stopped. Started again. "I don't want to be someone's conscience exercise. It did not change because I felt sorry for you." "Then, why?" The room held what it held. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside the window the bare trees stood against a white sky. He said, "Because you are not what I came here expecting." She said, "What did you come here expecting?" He said, "A reason." The words sat between them. She understood it. He saw that she understood it, saw it in the way her face changed again, the shutters dropping partway, something complicated moving behind them. A reason to carry what he'd been carrying. A reason that looked like justice and functioned like purpose and kept the whole structure of himself upright for another century. She had not been that. She had brought him coffee. She had said gesturally with a wince. She had put her mother's photograph in the light and talked to her cat and built a wall of notes that sprawled across her window frame and written margin notes in her research documents that were the most useful feedback in the building. She had looked at him on a dark street and said goodnight in a voice that suggested she was not afraid of what she was looking at, which was not the same as not knowing what she was looking at. She had not been a reason. She had been a person. He had not factored that in. She stood up from the chair. She walked to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out at the bare trees. 600 years, she said. Yes. You've been carrying this for 600 years. Yes. And Daniel would have been, she paused, calculating. 31. Forever. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. He watched her shoulders. She was breathing carefully, the deliberate rhythm of someone managing something large in a small container. My mother never told me about the family history, she said. She called it things we don't need to carry forward. I thought she was being another pause. Protective. Or avoidant. Now I think she actually didn't know. I think it got lost somewhere. The actual story. It does, he said. In families. In time. Unlike you. She turned from the window. It didn't get lost in you. No. She looked at him with an expression he had no word for. Not pity, she had said she was not doing pity and she wasn't. Not fear, which he had expected and never received. Something more complicated. Something that looked at 6 centuries of carried grief and did not flinch from the weight of it. I'm not going to tell you to let it go, she said. I'm not in a position to tell you what to do with a loss I wasn't alive for. That's not mine to assign. She came back to the chair. Sat down. But, I want you to know that I'm sorry it happened. The real version of sorry. The one that doesn't fix anything. He said nothing. And, I want you to know that I'm angry, she said. At you. For what you did, the job and the rent and the setup. I need you to know that I'm holding that. Yes, he said. Those aren't canceling each other out, she said. They're both just true at the same time. I know. She nodded. Once. Like something had been settled. She picked up her bag from the floor by the chair, the motion practical and unhurried, and, she said, I'm going to go home. I need to think. Yes, he said. I'll come back tomorrow, she said. It was not a question. She said it like a fact she was announcing, the same energy she used when she told him she'd made too much coffee and was giving him a cup. The decision was already made. She was simply informing the room. She went out the door. He sat in the empty office for a long time. She did come back. She came back the next day and the day after that and every day for the 2 weeks that followed, and each day was slightly different in the way days are when the distance between two people is shortening, not dramatically, not in any single scene, but in the way of small degrees. The coffee in the morning. The margin notes. The 2 seconds of eye contact that became 3, that became the space where a conversation might begin. She asked him questions. Not always about Daniel, not always about the history, sometimes just questions, the kind she collected with the restless curiosity of someone who was always looking for the story under the surface of things. She asked him about the languages he'd forgotten. She asked him what technology had most surprised him. She asked him once, on a Thursday afternoon when the light was flat and gray and it was raining against the window, what he missed about the world before he was what he was. He had not expected that question. He sat with it. Genuinely not knowing how things would end, he said eventually. She thought about this. You can see the endings now? The shapes of them, he said. Not always the specifics. But, the shapes. What's the shape of this one, she said. Meaning the office. The rain. The conversation. He looked at her. I don't know. She seemed satisfied with that in a way that confused him. As if I don't know from someone who could usually see the shapes of things was the most interesting answer he could have given. She went back to her work. He went back to his. The rain continued. He was not carrying the grief any differently. He knew that. It was still there, Daniel was still there, 31 and ancient, gone for 6 centuries, the loss had not become smaller or lighter or softer. Loss did not do that. It became load-bearing in the structure of a person, and you did not remove it without consequence. But the purpose he had built around it, the 600-year project of revenge, the careful machinery of it, the way it had given him a direction to face when there was nothing else, that had changed. Not disappeared. Changed. He was facing a different direction now. He was not certain when that had happened, and, not knowing the when was strange for someone who had spent centuries knowing exactly how time passed. Stefan came back. He arrived on a Friday evening without notice, which was itself a statement. Zara was still at her desk when Lucian came to her doorway and said, "You should go home." She looked up from her screen. She looked at him. She read the room with the journalistic instinct that was more useful than any of her actual journalism training, the shape of the sentence, the specific flatness, the word should where he would normally say nothing at all. "Is this about to be bad?" she said. "Go home," he said. "Lucian." He said her name. Not back. He didn't say her name. He stood in the doorway and the light behind him was the warm yellow of the old building and his face was the closed, careful face, the management face, the one she now knew was the face he wore when something mattered enough to need controlling. "Please," he said. She packed her bag. She went home. She did not sleep. What happened in the building that Friday night, she put together in pieces over the days that followed. Stefan had come with a decision from what Lucian called, with the same geographic flatness, the others, the older networks, the governing structures that did not have a name she would find in any document. They had been patient with Lucian's deviation from the plan. They were no longer patient. The Reyes bloodline had been on the list for 6 centuries. It was Lucian's right as the injured party to act or to decline, but, if he declined, the matter would be handled by other means. Other means. She understood what that meant. She sat in her apartment on Saturday morning with this information, which Lucian had not given her but, which she had assembled from 3 conversations and 2 documents she was not supposed to have seen and, the one time she had asked a direct question and, watched his face very carefully when he answered it. She called Priya. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay," said Priya. "It's going to be a lot." "Okay. Promise you won't make the face." "I can't promise that if I don't know what you're telling me, Zara." She told her. There was a very long silence. Then, Priya made the face. Zara could hear it through the phone, the exact texture of Priya's silence when she was making the face, and, then, Priya said, "Are you safe?" "Yes," Zara said. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Is that because you're actually sure or because you trust him?" Zara looked at the wall of notes by her window. The photograph in the light. The post-its and the string and the sprawling, honest chaos of how she thought. "Both," she said. At the same time. Priya made a different kind of silence. "Okay," she said finally. "What do you need?" Lucian came to her apartment on Sunday. She had been expecting him. She had made coffee, too much, which she did deliberately now, a joke that was not only a joke, and, when she opened the door he stood in it for a moment in the way he sometimes stood in things, with the consideration of a person who had learned to assess spaces before entering them. "Come in," she said. He came in. He did not sit. He stood near the window, and the bare November trees were behind him and the light was the thin gray light of a morning that had not fully committed. He looked at the wall of notes. He looked at the photograph. "I told them no," he said. "I know," she said. "It will not resolve the situation permanently," he said. "They are patient. They will wait and try again." "I know that too. You've been doing research." "I'm a journalist," she said. "It's reflexive." He turned from the window. He looked at her with the direct look, not 2 seconds, not 3, not managed. Just looked. "I want to explain something to me," she said. "Not ask. Explain it to myself, out loud." Because it's confusing and you're the only person here. All right, he said. You came here to destroy my life, she said. You built the whole thing, the job, the building, the access. You were waiting for the right moment. And, then, somewhere in the middle of it she stopped. Not because she didn't have the word. Because the word was large and she wanted to hold it right. You stopped wanting what you came here for. Not because you forgave anyone. Not because you decided the old grudge was wrong. Just because she stopped again. She looked at him. Because I became real to you, she said. He was quiet. That's it, isn't it, she said. I'm not a bloodline or a category or a debt. I became a specific person with specific habits and I make too much coffee and I forget my napkin and I have a cat with no sense of self-preservation and you couldn't fit me back into the shape of what you came here for. The clock ticked. Outside a car passed. Yes, he said. She breathed. She thought about Daniel not as an abstraction but as a real person, 19 and burning with conviction, reaching toward a family that was holding a knife behind their back. She thought about Lucian watching it happen and carrying it across 600 years, keeping it alive because the alternative was a grief so large it had no shape. She thought about her mother's photograph in the light. She thought, we are both people who carry the ones we've lost into every room we enter. She said, what do you want now? He looked at her with the face that had stopped being managed. Raw, she thought, not young raw, not inexperienced raw, but the rawness of something very old that has removed its armor in a specific room for a specific person and is standing very still in the vulnerability of that. I don't know, he said. I haven't wanted something new in a very long time. That's interesting, she said. Is it? It means you're at the beginning of something, she said. Instead of the end. He was quiet. I'm still angry, she said. About the setup. I want you to know I haven't put that down. I know. And I need you to understand that I'm not going to be a replacement for what you lost. I'm not a way to close a grief. That's not what I am. No, he said. And the way he said it, not defensive, not correcting, simply acknowledging, told her that he had already understood this. That the distinction had been made somewhere in the careful thinking he did in empty offices in the dark. Okay, she said. She handed him the coffee. He took it. He sat down, finally. In the chair by the window, with the bare trees behind him and the photograph of her mother across the room and Brutus arriving from whatever he'd been doing and placing himself between their feet with the decisive confidence of a creature who had assessed the situation and found it acceptable. Tell me about Daniel, she said. Not as research. Not as history. Not as the wound it was. Just, tell me. The way you tell people about the ones you loved. The way keeping the story alive is the only thing that keeps the person in it from being only ash. Lucian looked at the space between his hands. He said, he laughed at everything. She settled back in her chair. Outside the city went on the Sunday slow traffic, the pigeons, the sound of someone's radio 2 floors up, the ordinary music of a world that kept going regardless of what was held inside it. The trees stood bare and patient, waiting for spring the way things wait when they have done it before and know it comes. He talked. She listened. The coffee went cold. Neither of them moved to fix it. There is a kind of ending that does not resolve and is not a failure for it. Lucian did not forget his grudge. That is not what happened. Daniel was still 31 and ash and gone, and the family that had done it had scattered across history and the last living thread of them was sitting across from him in a small apartment with a cat on her feet and a wall of notes and her mother's photograph in the light. The grief had not become lighter. The loss had not become something he could put down. But he had not destroyed her life. And he was not going to. Not because the revenge was wrong, that was a more complicated question and it had a more complicated answer and it was not finished being answered. But because Zara Reyes was not a bloodline. She was a person who had gotten up every morning for 3 weeks and walked 12 minutes to a job she didn't know was a trap and made coffee for the man who had said it and asked better questions when she had better questions to ask. She was a person who carried her own dead carefully and went on working. He understood that. He understood it in a register that 600 years of watching human behavior had never quite reached before, not with the anthropologist's distance but with something that felt, in its unfamiliarity, like the thing it actually was. The thing Stefan had set in motion would need to be unmade. That would take time. The networks were patient and they had long memories, and he would need to spend those memories down the same way he had spent the last 6 centuries, carefully, precisely, with the thoroughness of someone who had nothing but time. But that was the next thing. This was the current thing. This room. This morning. This person across from him who was looking at him with the particular expression she had, the one that was not afraid of what it was looking at, which he now understood was not absence of knowledge but presence of choice. She knew enough. She was choosing anyway. With full awareness and full anger and full complication. He respected that. More than he had expected to respect anything this century. She poured more coffee. She filled his cup without asking. She did it the same way every time, the casual confidence of someone who has decided a preference is reasonable and trusts you to agree. He thought Daniel would have liked her. This time the thought arrived and he let it stay. It did not feel like theft from the grief. It felt like the grief making room. Which was not the same as the grief leaving. But it was something. Brutus moved from between their feet to the center of the rug and stretched out with the enormous satisfaction of an animal that had correctly identified the safest spot in the room. The trees outside were bare. The sky was the pale gray of something that had not yet decided what it was going to be. Zara Reyes looked at him across the coffee cups and the quiet morning and said, "So, what do we do now?" He considered this. He said, "I think we figure that out." She thought about this. She nodded. Once. Like something had been settled. Like they were both, for the first time in a long time, at the beginning of something rather than the end. Outside, the city went on. The trees stood bare. The sky stayed undecided. And, in a small apartment in a building he owned and she had made a home of, the vampire king who had come looking for a reason to carry what he'd always carried looked at a girl who had refused to be a reason and chose, for the first time in 600 years, to want something new instead. He did not forget Daniel. He just stopped letting Daniel be the only thing he was.